Well, hello. I am. I can't tell you guys how excited I am to be with Dr. Warren Farrell today. Dr. Farrell, you've been chosen by the Financial Times as one of the world's top 100 thought leaders, and you are. I mean, your books are published in over 50 countries, 19 languages. They include the New York Times bestseller "Why Men Are the Way They Are." Plus international bestseller, The Myth of Male Power. And your most recent is The Boy Crisis, 2018, that you co-authored with John Gray. And The Boy Crisis was chosen as a finalist for the Ford Indies, which is the Independent Publishers Award. And Dr. Farrell, you've been a pioneer in both the women's movement. And here's the thing that really intrigued me. You were elected 3 times to the board of NOW, National Organization of Women in New York City, which I would love to hear your story and just how you've come to where you were at versus where you were. You've been involved in the men's movement as well, called GQ magazine, the Martin Luther King of the men's movement, which I thought that was wonderful. You've conducted couples communication workshops nationwide. You have appeared on thousands of TV shows and have been interviewed everyone from Oprah to Larry King to Tucker Carlson to Regis Philbin and Charlie Rose. You're frequently featured in the New York Times and many publications worldwide. You're married. You have
Yes,
2 daughters, and you live with your wife in Mill Valley, California. So is that where we're finding you now in your home in Mill Valley?
I'm right here. I'm right here in my home in Mill Valley, in my office.
Where's Mill Valley? What part of California is that?
It's just about 10 miles north of the Golden Gate Bridge. So it's
oh wow, okay, very
in
good.
Marin County. Marin County is the heart of liberalism, and Mill Valley is the heart of liberalism. And so there are a couple of people in Mill Valley without a hot tub, but and so I live in a park of redwoods and stuff like that. So you can imagine with many of the things I'll be sharing that are much more aligned with what conservatives feel, that I have my challenges even in my neighborhood. So.
Yeah, well, but you have a liberal background, but not. I guess I would call myself a classical liberal.
Yes, that is exactly what I am. And for people, in the old days when I grew up, liberalism was something that meant you were inclusive, not inclusive in the way President Biden says he's inclusive, like with a White House Gender Policy Council.
Right.
Supposed to be inclusive, but is in fact exclusive. That is, it exclusively focuses on women and girls and doesn't include men and boys. And, if I ask if you asked, I have a grandson who's 3.5 years old, he can already tell me that there are boys and girls. And that if, therefore, that if gender was to be mentioned, that it would be that maybe we should think of boys and men who are having, by the way, problems in more than 50 different areas, to a greater degree than girls are having problems. And if we care about being inclusive and diversity and real equity, it's just about unfathomable that people would call themselves progressive and then create a gender policy council that is the opposite of progressive, the opposite of inclusive, the opposite of diverse, and the opposite of being in favor of equity.
What's intriguing to me in this day and age is that, especially with COVID, right, that we're supposed to be about the data. We're supposed to be about the science. We're supposed to be about the facts. And the facts and the data and the science is that males are failing today.
Yes, and just to give you
false. And yet we're thought to be this dominant, toxic masculinity, and but the reality is that men are wilting today.
Yes, and so just to make sure that the people who are listening are really clear as to how accurate your statement is, I'll just give you a couple of examples of it.
Sure.
At age 9, boys and girls rarely commit suicide, but when they do, it's about in equal numbers. Between the ages of 10 and 14, boys commit suicide. Our sons commit suicide twice as often as our daughters. Between the ages of 15 and 19, it goes up to 4 times as often as our daughters. Between the ages of 20 and 24, it goes to 5.5 times as often as our daughters. That's just the beginning of it. I didn't realize until I did the research for the boy crisis that our sperm count that predicts the fertility that our children, the strength of our children in terms of the fertility, the sperm counts of boys and young men have gone down 50% when I wrote the boy crisis book, and they're now down to 60%. So just in the few years since I've written that book,
Wow.
it's another 10% down. I didn't realize before I started the research in the book that the IQs of boys have dropped 15%. I had no idea that when children are raised without dads, what I call dad deprived children, both boys and girls, our sons and daughters on average, by the age of 9.5, their telomeres are already 14% shorter, which predicts that the telomeres are what contains all the ingredients for your genes to predict what type of safeguards you have against cancer, against heart disease, against
Wow.
other genetic problems. And if your telomeres are short, that predicts a shorter life expectancy. So by the age of 9.5, boys and girls who are dad deprived have telomeres that are already 14% shorter, predicting approximately a 14% shorter life expectancy. However, boys' telomeres are yet again 40% shorter than girls are when they are dad deprived. And so you get
Oh
some
my gosh.
sense of already boys, male life expectancy is about 5 years shorter than girls. And so now with the increase in dad deprivation, we're really talking about a major future potential increase in the life expectancy gap between our sons and our daughters. And I know I sense from what you said about being a classic, liberal of background that, that you care about everyone. To me, we're all in the same family boat. When only one sex wins, both sexes lose. And
Oh yeah.
for me, it shouldn't be like we're having a women's movement blaming men or a men's movement blaming women. We really should be focusing on having a gender liberation movement, freeing both sexes from the rigid roles of the past toward more flexible roles for our future. And that's what I think we should be aiming toward. And the feminist movement, which should be theoretically the pioneer of this. Betty Friedan, in her book called The Second Stage, said the second stage of the women's movement must be inclusive of boys and men. Otherwise, the women's movement will plateau. She didn't even predict how toxic the women's movement would become if they didn't include boys and men. And so
Is that how you found your direction away from the women's movement when you're involved with the National Organization of Women in New York City?
yes, what happened actually, the sort of a crucial moment happened when I was doing, this was about, let's say it was, I got involved with the National Organization for Women in 1969. And between 69 and 74, I was elected 3 times to their board of NOW in New York City. And then sort of toward the end of that process, my former wife became a White House fellow. So we left New York City to go down to DC. I became the wife of a fellow, if you will. And and I was mentioning to the board that just before I went down there, that the divorce rates were increasing dramatically. And we already knew from the Moynihan report, which had been published in 1965, that the children who did worse were children in fatherless families or
Right. I
deprived
remember.
families. And, and so now I was beginning to see, it was no longer 1965, it was like 1977 or so. And I'm saying there's a huge increase in divorces. We have early data that is again showing the children who are doing worse, both girl children and boy children who are doing worse, are children growing up in dad deprived families. And I'm mentioning this to the board members, and there is like a dead silence. And they say to me, Warren, you know, are you saying that we should take away the rights of women to be the ones to say that they should be in charge of the children if they think that's best for the children? I said, well, equality is about both sexes having equal involvement, but a much deeper issue than theoretical equality is, when we all care about the future of our children, do we not? And if we are finding that the future of our children, it works out best when both fathers and mothers are approximately equally involved in caring for the children, should we put the neglect of our children um, in the background so that a woman can say, oh, I really realize I made a mistake marrying of the father that he is. And the father of my children said, I met a new guy and he wants to move out of state because he has a better job there. And so I want to move out of state and take my children with me. And I'm sure he's going to be great with the new father because after all, we're getting along better than their biological father is. And so, wouldn't that be just fine? And shouldn't we as women, as the mothers, have the decision to be able to do what's best for our children? And I said, that's like, saying that all medical doctors should be male because in the past they've been male, and males know and male medical doctors know what's best for the children of
Right.
for their patients. And so shouldn't all medical doctors who are male decide whether a woman should be allowed to be equally involved or not? I said, everybody who is in charge of an area becomes territorial. And so, and women after divorce especially often feel that they are the best raisers of children, but we have very hard data here to show that that's not true. Well, a couple of people on the board said, Warren, we have a lot more to do than just worry about custody issues. We have all these other women's issues to solve. We can't afford to lose members and to dilute our political base. And so I said, so you're willing to choose politics over the future of our children? And at that point, when I'm confronted on that, they said, well, listen, Warren, all your income, all your money, all your fame, all your TV shows, they all come from recommendations from feminist groups. And so if you want to jeopardize that, we wouldn't want to. And so the handwriting was on the wall and I
Yeah.
knew I had a decision to make. Would I, go with the research and speak up about it? Or would I try to go where my source of income was? And you know how hard it is, being somebody who's a political leader, that when, if your money runs out, it's hard to run a campaign and it's a tough choice. But I just decided that I would do the best that I could to
Well,
use the money.
yeah, you want to just sleep at night.
Yes, yes, exactly. And when you don't examine these issues too much, the people who are feminists basically have two sets of beliefs, which is one is that anything that gives women freedom is something that is good. And the second is that we live in a patriarchal world in which men made the rules to benefit men at the expense of women. And that last perspective is really dangerous because we don't live in a world dominated by a patriarchy. We live in a world dominated by the need to survive and to have.
Yes, that's interesting. Now, one thing I want to point out, and I'd love to hear your comments about or thoughts about this, is that the women's movement really was directly on the heels of the Great Society movement, right,
Yes.
by Lyndon Johnson.
Mhm.
Can you speak to what we did in government to destroy impoverished families?
Yes, basically what we did is we, out of compassion and out of love, and we said, okay, a single mom, has a really hard time, so let's give her money to be able to support her. What happened though was that then the single mom had to deal with a choice. I'm going to get more money from the government if the father of the children do not live with us than I will if the father of the children does live with us. So it's better for the father of the children to not live with us. We didn't realize that dad's time is more valuable than dad's dime. And
Wow,
that
that's good. That is so good. Yes, that is really powerful. But I've done marriage and family life counseling for almost
Mhm.
well over 30, well, close to 30 years, well over 20
Oh,
years. And y- y- all marriages experience crisis in the early years, right? As you try and take two people and you try and mesh them together into a successful marriage. It's difficult, it's hard. And then on top of it, add finances, right? Which is a natural problem
mhm,
for all couples because we all have a different vision on how we should spend money,
mhm, mhm.
what role money plays in our lives. And then take Uncle Sam and add him to the marriage and him saying to a woman, you don't need him, kick his ass out, I'll be your husband. And
Yes.
that's what happened.
Yes, in effect, the government became a substitute husband. And we have found that that is, and so let's take this back to the Moynihan Report. In 1965, this senator, who was a sociologist, PhD in sociology, who's also a US senator, he was an advisor to both presidents who were Republican and Democrat. He was a Secretary of Labor to presidents who were both Republican and Democrat. One of the
Right.
most respected figures that have been in politics in recent years. So he's given this extremely tough assignment. Find out why we have all this extraordinary crime in inner cities. And everyone is like, their backs are stiffening and saying, oh my God, he's going to find out that, blacks are committers of crime and that blacks are therefore worse than whites. And everyone is sort of like, sort of holding their breath, so to speak. And he finds out something very different from that. He finds out that it's only at that point in history, 25% of children who were being raised were being in black families were children being raised with dad deprivation, without dad involvement.
Right.
He said, the problem is not blacks. The problem is the children raised with dad deprivation. And because that's where all the crimes were happening, that's where the gang leaderships, that's where the boy without a father, the boy went from a female only home to a female dominated school. And he had no male role model. We all know enough about testosterone to know that when boys reach the age of puberty, they start developing this enormous testosterone. This testosterone, when channeled constructively, is one of the world's most powerful and positive forces. When channeled destructively or not channeled at all,
Mm.
it is one of the world's most destructive forces. And so as I began studying this, I saw that almost all of our mass shooters were dad-deprived children, boys. Almost all of our ISIS recruits were dad-deprived children, both male and female. Almost all our prisoners were dad-deprived children. Well, without the ISIS recruits part of it, Moynihan had discovered a lot of this in terms of committing of crime back in 1965. And he said the issue is not blacks or whites. The issue is that in the black community, only in this 25% that is dad deprived, that's where the crimes are coming from. And so, and at that point in time, here's the amazing thing. At that point in time, the percentage of Caucasians who had children being raised in dad-deprived families was only 3.2%. Now it is 35% in Caucasian families, which remember is higher than it used to be in Black families of
Right.
25%. In Black
Right.
families, it's now 71, 72% of Blacks being raised in dad-deprived families, which is why when the White House Gender Policy Council does not, says it focuses on racial justice as well as gender equity, if you focus, you cannot possibly focus on racial justice without focusing on Black males. You can't possibly say you care about Black Lives Mattering if you don't focus on restoring fathers to the Black community and now the Caucasian and Hispanic communities as well. That is the single way to reduce the size of government is to increase the involvement of dads.
Oh, wow. Amen. Yeah, you bring up the violence issue, and what originally drew me to you was the your story in the Epoch Times about violence and kids being without a dad. And it, I originally thought about Parkland, the Parkland shooting,
Yes,
and the young man
Nicholas Cruz.
that was involved in that perpetrated that terrible crime. And I read really compelling book, Why Meadow Died, by the father of one of the kids that was killed in the Parkland shooting. And it broke my heart for him to be able to have to write about no dad should ever have to bury their child. But to hear his story of who this young man was, and it harkens back to pretty much, I wouldn't say every mass shooter story, but I'm having a hard time of thinking about one that had a healthy father figure in their life.
There are a few, but just to give you a sense of the degree to which you're headed in the right direction, it's about 90% of our mass shooters have significant dad deprivation issues. 100% of our school shooters in the 20th century, the school shooters who have killed 10 or more people, those school shooters so far there's only been 5 that have killed 10 or more people in the 21st century, but all 5 of those have been dad deprived boys. And what I talked about in the Epoch Times op-ed was that if we really have to be aware when schools open up again, boys have been through, if you have dad deprivation on top of getting addicted to video games, on top of sort of not accomplishing a great deal, being a failure to launch, being not having good social skills. When you put all those things together, I unfortunately feel that if we don't take precautions, and I don't mean security precautions, I mean precautions of getting men and fathers and great male role models involved with children who are boys. We are going to be setting ourselves up for a very significant number of school shootings in the fall. And I'd much rather say, what can we do to prevent that? And here are some, in the Boy Crisis book, I found that we had done a really good job of working with girls who were depressed, and all the funding, amazingly, even though all the funding for suicide research is for suicide by girls, and what causes that, even though the suicide rate of boys is 4 to 5 times as higher and goes as high as 1,750% greater for males over 85, or 1,750% more likely to commit suicide than females over 85. So even though suicide is largely a male issue, the funding is almost 100% for how do we solve it for girls and women. And
Next,
so it's just like,
uh,
and I know the reason for that, but it's not functional. It's not functional for helping us determine ahead of time what would be an inventory we should all be giving our children and our students at school, that would allow us to identify what I call the 63 red flags of depression, serious depression, or suicide. So if you ask a boy a question like, do you feel that anyone loves you, that there's no one who loves you? That's an indicator. If the answer is no, that's an indicator. Do you feel that there's no one who needs you? That's another indicator.
oh,
Do you feel there's no hope of that changing? That's a really big indicator if all 3 of those are checked off. There's no one that loves me, no one that needs me, there's no hope of that changing. Do you feel that if you talk to somebody about your feelings, that they would lose respect for you? That's another big one. If they feel that they're going to only lose respect, that will only make them more depressed, more prone to suicide. And these are things that, if everybody at school is getting these inventories to check off, an individual boy doesn't feel he's being selected out for as somebody who has problems. And he also begins to realize as he's filling this out that, gee, I'm not alone in these feelings, because if this was unusual, it wouldn't be on this inventory to begin with.
Right.
And so we need to be preparing ourselves to identify these boys, help these boys. Are these boys going to be angry? You bet they are. But we have to understand that anger is vulnerability's mask. That whenever you see anger, and I know that you know this from couples counseling, a woman gets angry, a man gets angry, the other person's had an affair, they have accused them, they've distorted what they've said, they've undermined their integrity. The other person gets angry. Why are they angry? Because they're feeling vulnerable. They're feeling like they've been just reduced to nothing. And if you take that anger and say, how can I heal this anger? I can heal it by listening, not by calling them haters, but responding to them of I can be a healer rather than a facilitator of their hatred by not listening.
I want to take you back to the foundation of these mass shooters. Serve on the board of directors, or just violence as a whole. I serve on the board of directors for Mighty Oaks. We help veterans with post-traumatic stress.
For what? For Mighty?
Mighty Oaks Foundation
Yeah.
help veterans with post-traumatic stress. And, a lot of the guys that we've been able to help over the years have not had a good, strong foundation with their dads growing up. Either the dad wasn't there, or it was an abusive situation, toxic situation for them. And so as they launch into the world, they're not ready for some of the crisis situations that they're going to be thrown into.
Yes. Yes.
And then they get back from Iraq or Afghanistan. And this is something that Colonel Bill Chatfield, he was a Marine colonel, and he said, Steve, he said, when we get these guys off the bus at MCRD in California, at Pendleton, or in Parris Island on the East Coast, he said, we teach them SEER, survive, evade, resist, escape. We embed it in the limbic system of the brain to survive, evade, resist, escape. And when they get back, and as soon as they step off the plane, they lose their sense of mission, sense of purpose, sense of unit cohesion, and a job, and they experience depression. And rather than helping them work through this and get back to, and really unpacking their psychosocial history and helping them resolve some of this, we put them on psychotropic medications.
Yes. Yes. We solve the problem by increasing the problem.
Yes.
And you're exactly right. One of the things I discuss in the Boy Crisis book is, what we need to do, even while the moment, if somebody has been in combat, we need to take approximately that amount of time that they've been in combat to work on healing them, because what it takes to kill in war is the opposite of what it takes to love at home.
Wow. Profound.
When you get home, your wife feels like she's trying to do the best she can, and she's created a routine, a way of dealing with the children that is the best that she can do. However, and the dad is coming home feeling, I've learned so many things in the military. I've learned that I can do so much more than I ever believed I could, that I could overcome adversity, that I could avoid death, that I could be creative in 100 different ways. I want to bring this to my children. I want my wife to feel proud of me, that I have a contribution to make. I want to take the load off her shoulders. And particularly if I have boy children, I really want to make them be able to be the best possible boys. But he comes home, he doesn't know how to communicate this. The wife feels like interfered with and overrun by something that she's not familiar with. And so when I did the research to the Boy Crisis, I started saying, well, if dads are so important, exactly why are they so important? And found that dads and moms they each have a different style of parenting that encompasses about 7, 8, or 9 differences depending on the father and the mother. And so for example, a father will be much more likely to say, okay, now I'm home, you guys, and let's say he has two boys and a girl, and he
Yeah.
throws them on the couch and says, okay, your job is to jump on my back and pin the three of you pin me down before I pin all three of you down together. And the mother's looking at this and saying, oh my God, I would never let them roughhouse like this. I just know that sooner or later, somebody's going to get hurt. Well, she's only about 99% likely to be right. And sooner or later, somebody gets hurt. And the father goes, okay, now, Johnny, you can't stick your elbow in in your sister's eyes like that. So if you do that again, no more roughhousing. You got it? Got it, Dad. And then he goes back into roughhousing, and the children are experiencing, all the excitement, which overwhelms their promise to not do anything that hurts the other one. But so they go back and they do something that is like they become too aggressive. And Dad says, that Johnny, when you pushed your brother aside, was too aggressive. Here's what is okay. You can use your eyes to fake me out. You can use this type of body language, which you can't just shove your brother out or your sister out. That's being aggressive. You want to be assertive. And you have to think of your brothers and sisters' needs. Otherwise, I'll end the roughhousing. And so I warned you that I warned you about that. You did it again. So there'll be no more roughhousing until Wednesday night. And let's say it's Monday. And Mom is going, wait a minute. You saw that twice that they hurt each other, and you're still letting them roughhouse 2 nights from now? How can I possibly get this out of you? You come back from the military, you think you're going to be, you're going to be putting our children in jeopardy. I can't care for that. But I've never heard a military man or a father of any type of background say, sweetie, I want to roughhouse with the children, because when I do, the way I roughhouse by putting boundaries down and then taking roughhousing away from them, when they violate those boundaries, when I take roughhousing away from them, that will require them to do the things like thinking of their brothers and sisters' needs. That will help them develop empathy. Here's the hard data to show that roughhousing combined with boundary enforcement deepens a child's ability to be empathetic. Then if we don't do that, deepens the child's ability to distinguish what is assertive from being aggressive, and also deepens the child's ability to have postponed gratification, because immediate gratification is pushing your brother and sister aside. Postponed gratification is not being able to push your brother and sister aside if you want more roughhousing. And so what I'm teaching them is these 3 sets of skills. But I've never said, I can't blame moms, because I've never heard a father say to a mom, I want to roughhouse with the children to teach them how to be empathetic, socially assertive, but not aggressive, and have postponed gratification. And I can't blame dads, because the reason I wrote this into the boy crisis is because all 9 different styles of dad style parenting are completely not discussed in parenting magazines. So even if the father was a student of parenting magazines, which few fathers are, he still wouldn't be able to say that to the mom. And it's this type of communication that the military needs to prepare both the father and the mother for, so that the father can feel respected and the mother can feel respect. No woman loves a man she doesn't respect.
Wow. Yeah.
When a woman sees a man roughhousing as if he was one of the kids, she loses respect. When she knows that he knows what he's doing, why he's doing it, and also has limits as to how far he'll take it, then she increases respect and values what he brings to the parenting table. Does that make sense?
It does. And I loved delayed gratification. So it's a way too for dads to develop emotional quotient, EQ, in their children as well, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's great. So I want to take us back to something that is very prevalent in our public schools today, which is this whole critical race theory,
Mhm.
and making sure that we do everything we can with this Marxist ideology to destroy the nuclear family and destroy dads. And I mean, it will be our undoing as a nation.
It really will be. I cannot say it was the purpose of feminists to undermine America, but Lenin and wrote quite extensively that the family was a patriarchal institution in which the father oppressed the mother, and so on. And so there was a lot of early propensity on the part of feminists to be very skeptical, A, of the family, but to be skeptical of men, and to be skeptical of fathers. They recognized that there were good men and there were good fathers, but they felt that, you know, a woman who wanted a divorce, and she didn't want the father involved, she should have priority over that, like we talked about before.
Right.
And so this is really, so the end result, whether it was the intent or not, has been the undermining of the family. And the result of undermining the family has been the weakening of the nation. And the bad news is that this is a global issue. In all 53 of the largest developed nations, there was enough control over survival in the middle and upper middle class that the society could become more permissive for divorce and more permissive for women to raise children without having fathers involved. So for example, in the United States today, 53% of women under 30 who have children without being married, which usually means that even the small percentage of those that are living with a man, that man, the father, is likely to be involved with the children an average of 3 years. So you have a boy who has a father attachment that in the first 3 years, and then the father virtually disappears, and he feels abandoned by the father. He doesn't have a chance to sort of know, to do the things like roughhousing, being, and all the 9 different characteristics of dad style parenting are lost to him. And he feels like he doesn't know who he is. He looks in the mirror and he sees that, he sees his body language is like his dad, and his nose and eyes and hair are like his dad's. And if the mother is saying, your dad is, I divorced him because he's a liar, he's irresponsible, he's a narcissist. And then the boy looks in the mirror and says, well, gee, I have all these characteristics like my dad. Maybe I'm a narcissist. Maybe I'm a liar. Maybe I'm irresponsible. And we don't realize that bad mouthing, those divorces, oftentimes leave a boy without understanding or knowing the half of him that is his dad.
Have you ever read any of John Eldridge's work, Wild at Heart?
Yes, I have read a little bit of it, but it was a while ago, and so I don't have a clean memory.
He talks a lot about the wound,
Mhm.
and very typically the wound that we have as males usually comes from our dads. Not always, but usually. And it's one of the things that we found at Mighty Oaks is that, is a human being, I'm deficient, I'm flawed. I'm selfish, or I'm too much this, too much that. I don't necessarily meet the needs of my sons and daughters the way I should. It's difficult. You have kids, they don't come with an owner's manual. And the hard part of it is that you may think that the first one comes along and you're like, okay, I'm starting to figure this out. Then the second one comes along and the second one is completely different than the first one. The third one, oh my gosh, is completely different than the other two. It's really a work in progress. And along the way, you're deficient in certain areas of your life. And it's one of the areas where we've found in working with men through Mighty Oaks is that as human fathers, we're deficient in many areas of what our boys need. And what we have found is that what we do is we point them towards God and his desire to be the father where Steve is deficient and where I've been deficient for my boys and for my daughter.
Mhm.
And we have found that in that relationship, he's meeting a need that I can't meet, that you can't meet. And it's probably why it's been one of the most successful programs in the United States. We've had over 4,000 veterans with PTSD go through the program.
Mhm.
We've had 1 suicide in 10 years, which is why the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines are sending active duty guys through our program. It really is amazing. When I went through the program about 5 years ago, I went through it with 30 guys probably a third of them were from the Wounded Warrior Battalion, meaning they're active duty. One of the guys was a SEAL Team 6, just 6 foot, Ben, 6'2", badass SEAL team, not just SEAL Team, but SEAL Team 6.
Mhm.
And these are the most amazing men that I have ever met. And to see what God is doing in their lives has just been absolutely amazing.
I so applaud what you're saying and doing. And if you're a mom watching this and you're saying, you know, well, I am a single mom and I'm raising my children, you know, what can I do? It's one of the things that, you know, I'll spend a few minutes on that because I really want
Sure.
to, if you know, first of all, study the differences between dad style parenting and mom style parenting, and let, if the father is at all of a decent human being, and then make sure you let him know that the children need that type of modeling for themselves. And if you have a good stepfather, but not a biological father involved, the children look at that half of themselves in the mirror that I just talked about before. They don't see the stepfather, and I say this as a stepfather. They say they see the half of them that is their biological dad. And so make it your goal to figure out if there's any possible way to bring the biological dad back in the picture by telling him how much he's needed and being specific about that by knowing, by letting him know that you see what he brings that is of value, why his teasing of children can be positive, why his willingness to let the child climb high in the tree where that you think is dangerous, how you and he can do checks and balance parenting together so the child gets to climb at that on the tree, increase its IQ by having synapses develop to make decisions about what's too risky and what's not, but yet still be protected by the father being under the tree without a cell phone and things like that. So there's lots of ways that you can work this out. However, if that's impossible after you've really done your due diligence, it's also important to get the child involved in a faith-based community. But vet your faith-based leader, not only for integrity and competence and good skills with your children, but also that he, and it should be a he if it's a boy that you're talking about, that he is forming groups that are confidential groups of other boys your son's age, so that your boy can begin to express feelings and express fears without
Yes.
feeling he's all alone and feeling that there's something wrong with him. Second, if the faith-based community is good, but you want more than that, get your son involved in Cub Scouts. There's some very good data that Cub Scouts increase, that when you participate in Cub Scouts for 2 years at a consistent level, your son's character increases in a positive way. And we all want our sons to have better character. Boy Scouts has one of the, in the Boy Crisis book, I deconstruct all the things that Boy Scouts do that almost nobody realizes, that has evolved over the years to bring out and reinforce the very best of masculinity. If you have a daughter who is interested in Boy Scouts, great. If you have a daughter who's interested in Girl Scouts, great. She has options that your son doesn't have. And some girls like taking the risk, but make sure the Girl Scouts are not diluting the Boy Scouts. And so make sure
I,
the Boy
I,
Scouts are still able to be Boy Scouts.
yeah, I saw some good data. My dad is 95 years old now. He's just turning
Oh,
90, greatest generation.
mm.
And
What a
it,
blessing for you, Steve.
yeah, the data around when the greatest generation, when they were young children, that's around the time that the Boy Scouts started,
Yes.
right? And how involved they were in it. And my grandfather was actually, he was a, I guess they called him a golden beaver, which is an award for adults that were involved in helping children in the Boy Scouts, and just how absolutely foundational that was for the greatest generation.
Mm-hmm. How wonderful. That's really, Boy Scouts are very dear to my heart. I was very, very deeply involved, but both as a Boy Scout and also as a junior assistant scout
Oh,
master.
wow, cool. That's so
And
cool.
And I went around the Washington, D.C. with Willie Iles, who was the government relations director for the Boy Scouts, trying to convince the Obama administration to create a White House Council on Boys and Men. That unfortunately never happened. By the way, while I'm on this issue, if you're a person who's saying, gee, it's such a shame that we don't have more attention to boys and men, yes, take some time, read the Boy Crisis book, but also don't just do that. Reach out to your congressman, your senator, your state assembly, state representative, or state senator, and let him or her know that what the problems are that boys are facing, and what types, and that you want the White House Gender Policy Council, them to pressure the White House Gender Policy Council to be inclusive of boys and men, to pay attention
Yeah.
to black males, to not just say black males matter in theory and then ignore them in practice. That's the ultimate form of racism, and so that we really need to. But I ask you not only to take responsibility in your family, but also to take responsibility politically, because there's something happening today that is very dangerous to the family, very dangerous to fathers. We're taking boys from the old days where every boy had a sense of purpose, every generation had its war. We trained boys to be willing to die so other people would live. And then we turned around and called our drafting of boys to die and be disposable. We called that male privilege. Like, would we feel it was female privilege if we drafted only females and put them in the front lines and protected men and had them stay at home? It is so outrageous. And then to have universities, if your son is a little bit older and going to a university, to have, you want him as a good parent to have his curiosity nurtured, to be able to hear anything and to defend against it, to speak against it, to speak in favor of it, to hear all sides of an issue. When I used to speak out at universities, when I was politically more correct, I always would require two podiums. And one podium was Dr. Warren Farrell, feminist, and the other one was Dr. Warren Farrell, masculist. And I would debate myself back and forth. And then I would require the audience to ask every question or make every statement from both the feminist perspective and the masculist perspective, because I said it's not good enough to hear a debate, because a debate, you usually walk out of a debate even more convinced of what you believed when you walked in. But you have to have all the perspectives in your own mind, holding equal weight in your mind, whether you're politically left, politically right. This is such an important thing to have happen when you are going through college. This is your years to learn how to think critically. And for the colleges to be replaced by cancel culture and microaggressions and places where we're deciding what's right to be heard and what's wrong to be heard. That's the McCarthy era of the left rather than the McCarthy era of the right.
I love one of the things that, oh man, I can't think of his name now. He was Bush's Secretary of State, or Bush 41 Secretary of State, Colin Powell.
Oh, Colin Powell, yes.
And he said, be careful not to keep your position too close to your ego. Because if your position goes, your ego won't allow it to die. Yes. And I love that you're such a man of truth and integrity, that you don't take this personally. You're on a mission to learn, and you've allowed your sense of truth to evolve. I'm really impressed with you, Dr. Warren, and I can't wait to read more of your books and follow you more.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure. For me, it's a pleasure also. Your audience doesn't know, but I just happened to be in Austin when you were reached out to me, and we almost had the chance to meet at the Austin airport, but I'm so glad we're having a chance to meet this way.
Yeah.
That's allowing our discussion to go beyond just you and I. And I thank you for creating this sort of opportunity for the people who follow you and your constituents to be able to hear your depth, your curiosity, your interest, your ability to ask great questions and to listen very thoughtfully.
Well, thank you so much for the time that you've spent with us. I was going to say, what would you say in closing? And I think you said it. really challenged us today. And I just really appreciate you, and I pray God's blessings over what you're doing. What you are doing is so important for our nation, and we've got to have ears to hear it, even if it's not comfortable for us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's just a pleasure being with you.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.